the first thing I'd like to say is I'm actually from Shipley, so I live here. I have a son who goes to school here, so I have a very vested interest in what's going on here. So thank you all for being here and thinking about this topic. The second thing is how change happens is an enormous topic. So I'm going to hopefully give you ways of thinking about how change might happen. I can't tell you how change does happen. I don't think anyone knows that. It's people's life's work to think about that. So I suppose the first thing I'd say is I'd really like to give you some ways to help guide what you're doing. I'm not going to give you answers. And also to manage expectations you have of nobody has figured this out. Nobody knows how to get the changes you want to see to happen. So I think just being, not putting too much pressure on yourself to have it figured out. So your knowledge and contributions are hugely important, but nobody's figured this out, so to take the pressure off. And the second thing about change is the kind of things that you want to see happen are really complicated. So you're trying to change how people move around, how houses are used, how food is produced and consumed, and those are sort of very complex systems, and by complex I mean there's lots of different parts and they interact and we don't really know how they interact, and that means that when you change something you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. So just really thinking about the complexity of what you're trying to do is really important. I don't have any slides today. I do have slides I will share with you afterwards. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm going to give you a handout that I'd like to share, and hopefully this will help to sort of ground the things I'm going to talk about and maybe structure things that you might want to ask me. I'm not saying you have to, but could you pass that around, one between people? And what the slide is it's just a range of different places where people might take actions to try and make change happen. And two of the points that I might want to take away is there's lots of different places where change might happen. So we're not going to be necessarily directing all our sort of aspirations and recommendations at one place. Maybe we might need lots of different places to happen. And another thing I'd like you to take away is that one of the key things is that the action in all those different places adds up to something. So the action of one person could make someone else be able to do something, or it could stop them doing something. So we might just think, coordination between different places of action is really crucial too. So on the sheet, and let me just pull it up on my screen because I've forgotten to keep one, we've got lots of different places. So I think when we're thinking about climate action, we quite often think about the national government. What should the government do? And that's one place where change can happen, and I'll go through that in more detail. Then people might be familiar with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, so that's a sort of step below the national government. And that's working across West Yorkshire. All the local authorities sort of contribute to it, but they have a sort of bigger remit, and they get some funding from the national government, and they can do different things. And then we have the local authority, which is sort of below West Yorkshire Combined Authority of local government, and they have certain actions, and we're very lucky in Shipley. We have not only a local authority, we have a town council here as well, and they have specific duties of things that they can do. So that's the kind of government, which is lots of different levels of government and lots of different departments in that government. So it's not one big homogenous lump, it's lots of different levels and types of groupings of people. So it's sort of government part of it. But also business has quite an important role as well. So they sell things or they sell services which can have a big impact or not a big impact, or they can make it easier for people to have, make positive choices, or they can make it not easy. So there's a real role for business as well. And then I think I've told them people, and I think that's a bit dismissive, because obviously government and businesses are people as well. They are not just entities, they are people. So communities, so people coming together as groups of people like this to do something. They're not a business, they're not the government, but they're still doing something. And they have action. And then we as individuals make choices and do things which have an impact on the climate. So there's lots of different points at which action can happen. And the main thing I'd want you to take away is that no one level is more important than the other, and also that there's connections between. So I'm going to take you through examples. So let's just work around your little ring of circles there. So let's take an example. Say if we wanted to reduce carbon emissions and get people to stop using fossil fueled cars. So say we wanted more cycling to happen in Shipley. That's one aspiration to have, but lots of different things need to happen to make that happen. So firstly, if as an individual, we'd need to cycle or walk more frequently to get out the car for short journeys. So that's what an individual would need to do. They taking into account their ability to do that. But one thing that might affect that is their access to a bike. So it might be incumbent on business to make bikes affordable for people, or to make the right kind of bikes for the kind of journey people need to make, or to set up cycle hire schemes so that people who can't afford a bike can still access a bike. So there's definitely a role for businesses in helping people get out of cars. Some people are quite frightened of cycling, quite understandably, in some of the roads around here. I don't know if anyone has cycled around here, but it's quite exciting. You try putting a 6-year-old on the back as well, it gets even more exciting. So there's a role for local government to actually make it safe to cycle by building maybe cycle lanes or segregating off traffic, or having areas where it's safe for bikes so individuals can cycle more safely. And going back to businesses, it might be a good idea for a business to have somewhere safe to put the bike when you get to, say, work or a shop, or having somewhere to shower. So, building somewhere on road where you can cycle safely might make it easier for an individual to get onto the road. Then for a local government to do that, the regional government might need to give them some money, because local authorities don't automatically get money to build cycle lanes. So there might need to be the regional government funneling some money into cycle lanes. And then the national government would need to make that a priority for them, but also possibly disincentivise fossil fuel transport modes, maybe by taxing, hopefully a tax that wasn't regressive on people that did need to drive. Regressive just means it has an impact on a certain part of society more than others. So if you put a tax on cars, say, and then people in rural areas still needed to drive, that would be regressive. Or if you made it more expensive to drive, it would make it have much more impact on people on a lower income, so that would be regressive. But there are ways that you can tax that kind of activity without making it regressive. So you can see something as simple as saying we need to get people out of cars needs lots of different types of actions from different types of organisations. So there's not one thing that you would do to get people out of cars, and it requires lots of different actors, people, organisations, to actually make the change. So you're already seeing that something quite simple needs action on the physical infrastructure. It needs people to make a conscious decision to behave differently. It needs something on businesses and something that making services or facilities available to people, and it needs funding. So there's lots of different elements to make the change, and it's worth just unpicking things sometimes. And I think that it makes things more complex, but it also makes it more accessible. There's lots of different things that different people can do. So that's just an example, and maybe it might be nice, not trying to lead you as to what questions you ask, but maybe there's something that's important to you, and we can just think through what that might look like in terms of what these different actors might want to do. So maybe have a think about an example you might want to go through to just test out that kind of thinking. So what I'd like to do is just, quite a lot of those circles, the organisations and individuals have particular things they can or can't do because of the nature of what they are. So, for example, local authorities have very specific requirements of what they have to do. So just thought it'd be useful to go through what each of those groups of people can or can't do because of just the nature of what they are, or because of some sort of legal standing. And all this is on a set of slides I can give you, so you can refer back to that. But I think for the purposes of you asking questions, it's worth just going through what these different groups might do. So the national government, and this is sort of all the sort of ministers who sit in Westminster, and all there's MPs, and then there's the civil servants who sort of do the work of thinking about what to do, and sort of answer to the MPs, but the civil servants do the thinking and putting forward suggestions that can get debated and taken on board. And there are certain things that government can or can't do just because of the way it's set up. So a very important thing that they can do is provide information. So they can fund organisations to provide information to people. They've done this historically on sort of energy saving or waste management, and they can fund information advert campaigns and that kind of thing. So that's quite important to sort of encourage, say, individuals and businesses, for example, to make certain decisions or to do certain things. So they can provide information. They do have a pot of money for spending on the nation, which might be building things, or it might be investing in sort of training, or it might be investing in sort of certain organisations that might support actions. So, for example, investing in building new roads is something that government does a lot of. It can invest in the railways, it can invest in, doesn't tend to build houses directly itself, but it tends to build things that sort of aren't privatised but are for the public good. So roads, for example, and railways are something that government directly invests in that can make a difference at the national scale. So local investment in roads, for example, would happen with a local authority. So it's things that are nationally important or connect things nationally. They can tax things that are undesirable to discourage them. The debate around taxing income is quite interesting at the moment, but they can put a tax on sort of things that they don't want to happen. Completely forgotten a good example of that, which is really not helpful to you, is it? But when we want to... No, cigarettes, thank you. Cigarettes and alcohol. So there's a tax on cigarettes and alcohol. There's a tax on leaded petrol, for example. So if there's something the government doesn't want you or a business to buy or to do, they can put up a tax on that kind of thing to discourage it. And again, there's issues with that about making it fair, but that's something that's a power to raise new tax to do that. And then sort of you can see these are getting increasingly sort of more level of control. And the last main thing they can do is actually regulate things. So they can say you can't do this or you have to do this. So seatbelt wearing is one that's quite often used for that. It's just become a law that you wear seatbelts. Or the amount of emissions that come out of chimneys. There's regulated levels on the amount of pollutants that come out of chimneys. So there has been some things where the government's just made a decision to say, no, that can't happen, or there's a level on that. And it tends to be things that are more simple, like you can measure what comes out of a chimney, or you can measure a behaviour, an activity, and you can sort of check that people aren't doing that. So they do have the power to actually stop certain things. Was that another good example? I'm obviously a bit thin on examples today. So they've got this sort of different range of powers, and that is quite heavily driven by politics. So it's the government, the type of party which is ruling tends to affect their preference to do a certain thing. So suggesting, for example, to a Tory government where the ideology of the party is that it's a sort of a light state and the state doesn't intervene, sort of heavy regulation might not work with their political ideology. So that can change, but it's quite important that the kind of activities they have have the possibility to do are political as well. So it's suggesting to one party in power something that is just doesn't fit with their ideology can be problematic. So it's not something that should stop us thinking about these are possibilities, but it's just worth being aware that might be why the government isn't doing it, because it doesn't fit with what they believe is the way to govern the country. So the national government is political. The other thing about the national government is sort of the duties fall in different departments. There isn't one government, there's lots of different departments. So there's the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, who have a lot to do with the climate crisis, a lot to do with like renewable energy, about regulating business, about not regulating business. So a lot of the stuff on energy and climate comes from there. But there's also Department for Transport, who will think about how to fund and get transport working. And they've got, objectives on transport which may not line up with the Department of Energy and Industrial Strategy's objectives. There's a lot of challenge that maybe the Department for Transport isn't so contributing to the efforts on climate change. So there's different departments with competing objectives to think about. And then there's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which is looking after farming, anything to do with flooding comes there. So sometimes obvious connections aren't happening. They're the way that government's divided up. So it's a little bit complicated. An extra layer of complication is what you think would be done in one department isn't necessarily done in that department. So it can be confusing as to what's being done and how it's being done. So just thinking about the different ways that they might do things and which department that might come in can be quite confusing at a national government scale. When we come down to regional government, so we're quite lucky, so we've got a mayor in West Yorkshire. We've got Tracy Brabin, who is a sort of mayor, and what that means is that we can strike a deal with national government about money coming directly to Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, for specific purposes, because we've got this sort of democratically elected mayor, and that gives them a little bit extra power. So the combined authority is the mayor's basically in charge of the combined authority. The combined authority sits across, I think it's 10 different local authorities in West Yorkshire. And what it means is this extra deal with the government means that they a little bit more power, a little bit more money comes down to a smaller scale. So it's not the national government making decisions about certain things. The government, it should be more connected to Yorkshire, has a bit more say about it. And they, again, can make decisions about spending that money on investing directly in infrastructure. So you'll have seen a lot around improvements in roads, in buses, in cycle lanes in West Yorkshire. And that's all come through this regional government combined authority. And the mayor has a lot to say on transport particularly, but also on skills as well. And they can set up schemes to invest in skills. So there's a real sort of interest in things that are doing good things on transport, but things that are doing good things on skills. They're two of the mayor's major priorities. But they can also fund things that other people are doing. So if there's an organisation like a community organisation who wants to set up a project that's related, then they can fund those projects. Or they can try and get people to invest in the region, so get other businesses to actually invest in the region. So they're trying to attract people to come in and invest in the region. So lots of different objectives, but some quite concrete ones relating to this kind of climate crisis issues. So that's regional government. And I looked at the website of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and there's a picture of Saltaire on the front page. So Saltaire is obviously very important to the Combined Authority. Read into that what you will. But I think it's, yeah, and there's some really knotty problems in Shipley and Saltaire that are relevant to Tracy Brabin. We've got several really good further education facilities here, and we've actually got a new centre for skills related to railway, which I think is another thing that Tracy Brabin would be really interested in. I noticed that Shipley College has just got a new programme related to building and the railways down at their site next to the station. So there's lots of things here that tie very well into what the Combined Authority is interested in and trying to do. And then in terms of local government, so that here would be Bradford Council, they're slightly more constrained. So their tasks, what they can do is set quite clearly by government. So they get given a pot of money each year, but they've got some specific things that they have to do. So they've got specific things around kind of adult and child social care they have to do. There's specific things around education, so they have to provide services, waste management being another key there. And the other thing to remember about local authorities is it's similar to national government. We elect people, our councillors actually run the council. So when we elect people to be councillors for our area, they actually then run the council. So it is, we have elected representatives which might have party affiliations, some of them don't, some of them do. It's very strong Labour in Bradford at the moment. But again, there's elected members with a political affiliation, and then you've got civil servants who are doing the sort of delivery work there. So these sort of two levels. But that's great because that's two levels of influence. You can influence the elected members and you can influence the civil servants. So local authorities can build things. So they have quite often they have social housing, which is in-house, and so they can build new things within housing. They can sort of do things on roads, physically on the roads. They can do things around flood protection, waste management, and they've got a lot of buildings. So a lot of the buildings in Bradford City Centre and out here, there's the town hall here, be a building that Bradford owns. So they've got a lot of buildings, use a lot of energy, that they can actually manage themselves. A lot of the social housing, they can do things as well. So there's a lot that they can actually physically change in Bradford if there's the funding available, and that's dependent on what the government gives them. And so, lots that can be done, but also lots of challenges, particularly around education and adult social care in Bradford. They can provide information, so the website is a fantastic place to provide information. They can provide drop-in centres for getting information. They can provide information on energy saving, on climate change. There's lots of sort of billboards and things that people provide information on, and they have access to a lot of the residents to provide information, so they can do that to encourage decisions that are more likely to contribute to the kind of change I think you're interested in. And the other key role of local government is on planning. So they approve planning permission. So if anyone wants to build anything in Bradford, they have to submit a planning permission, and then the council has to agree to them building that in the way that you describe it. So they approve those planning applications, but they also set the standards. So anyone that's ever had to interact on planning, there is a whole raft of guidance of what is expected from a new home or a new business premises. So some local authorities have gone so far as setting, say, every house has to have renewable energy on it. I don't think Bradford does. Some local authorities have said that every house has to have some sort of like open area for drainage. So they can make some quite sort of strong statements on what new buildings need to take into account. But if sometimes somewhere like Bradford, where there's not a lot of development, people might not necessarily choose to build new homes here as opposed to other places. They sometimes don't want to set too many requirements on that because they might put people off. So there's these sort of real issues that people are dealing with. So it would make a lot of sense. You think, well, why don't Bradford just set a planning requirement to do this? But the reality might be is they don't want to, because they don't want to put off developers. We've got a lot of empty land in Bradford. So there's sort of concrete duties, but also real realities. I haven't done anything about checking how I'm doing for time, so I do apologise. Bad lecturer. Businesses, again, I think we think about what businesses should do, but there's a reality of businesses having to make money, so they have to balance their sort of desire to contribute to climate change in society with their need to actually, make profit. That's the driver of businesses. And yes, they can invest in facilities if it aligns with business objectives. Yes, they can do research if they can have the profit to do that. Yes, they can train staff and manage their own risks, but it's a sort of a business decision about whether they prioritise that enough to invest in it and whether that affects profits and value to shareholders. And then there's a lot that sort of informal groups can do about, raising money from lots of places like charities, from government, to actually invest in facilities, providing information. We've got some amazing examples of cooperatives and community groups. I don't know if anyone knows the Capital of Cycling in Bradford. Well, they're doing a huge amount to train people in bike maintenance, in training people in riding a bike, and facilities and like improving skills, so people are actually learning to make a career out of cycling. Did you want to?
Partnering with Sustrans.
Yeah, exactly.
I did some work with them. I've got it on computer.
Fantastic. It'd be really good to know about that a bit later. But it's all, the skills and training doesn't have to come from business. It doesn't have to come from central government. Investing in facilities, there's some great facilities. Something like Capital Cycling is used. So that can come from these community groups as well that might know what local needs are a little bit more. And then the final group is sort of individuals, where we, insofar as infrastructure and what is affordable to us can do a lot. And I think that's the reality is there can be a lot of pressure on individuals to do something. Just buy different things, just don't travel, use public transport. But the reality is that all those things must be contingent on having those choices. So if you don't have a choice to get a bus, it's very difficult to be told to get a bus. If you can't afford to buy organic food, for example, it's very difficult to buy organic and sustainable food. So I think there's a lot of focus on what people buy and what people do, but there's a huge role for individuals in lobbying change. So all of those other organisations, businesses, different government organisations, we have huge influence by lobbying them to do certain things. So asking your MP, mindful of who our MP is, asking your local councillor, asking a business that you think could do something differently. There's huge power in just sort of voicing your concerns and raising, because elected representatives are supposed to represent us, and if they don't know what we think, they can't represent that. And businesses should respond to stakeholders, and if we buy from business, we are effectively a stakeholder. So it's a really powerful route to change, of not just do things different, but ask other people to do things different as well. So I'll give you all these slides, which breaks it down. It's got some links to like government websites. It's got some links to West Yorkshire Combined Authority. That's the sort of different elements of change. It would be really good to ask some questions, to get some more specifics, to know what you want to know about those different groups or the different routes to change across those areas. So you've got your prompt sheet, so maybe have a think about those different actors or the relationships between them, where there's been examples of really successful change. I'm having obviously a bad memory day today, but I'll do my best to think of examples. It'd be lovely to hear what you want to know more about that.
Can I ask you a question?
Is this
yeah?
sorry, can we just,
Oh,
We're
I'm
gonna
sorry,
break into groups.
Sorry, I'm going to run your schedule.
we're going to break into groups. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. So we're going to break into